Under the west gate of Sardis, archaeologists found two young men lying where they fell. Both had broken their left forearms, holding them up against something coming down. One of them had a coin beside his skull, a sliver of silver 1/3 of a gram in weight, stamped with a lion and a bull. It was money invented by the king they died for. Before anything moves, look at the ground, because the ground is most of the argument here. Lydia is the western edge of Asia. Persia is very nearly the eastern. One river runs between them, and every ally Croesus is about to buy sits somewhere out on this map, a long way from the fight. That king was Croesus of Lydia. His father had struck coins out of electrum, the pale gold that washes down the river Pactolus, a natural alloy of gold and silver, in no fixed proportion, so nobody could ever say what one was truly worth. Croesus refined it. He separated the metals and issued the first coinage of pure gold and pure silver in the world. The excavators at Sardis have dug up his refinery. We say rich as Croesus because of this man, and we mean it more precisely than we know. He did not simply own wealth, he standardized it. Which is why a scrap of his silver, lying next to a soldier's skull in the ash, is the whole story in miniature. So when Croesus considered war with the new power rising in the east, he did what a rich and careful man does. He sent to Delphi and paid for an answer. He did not simply trust Delphi. He tested it. He sent men to 7 oracles at once, with orders to ask, on one fixed day 100 days out, what the king of Lydia was doing at that hour. And on that day he did the least guessable thing he could invent. He had cut up a tortoise and a lamb and boiled them together in a bronze pot. Delphi sent that back. Croesus had bought certainty, and he had tested it like a man who understood money. The oracle told him that if he sent an army against the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. Croesus read that as a promise. It is worth noticing what the sentence does not contain. It does not say whose. For 60 years the river Halys had been the agreed border between Lydia and the Medes, and the Median king was Croesus's own brother-in-law. Then a minor Persian vassal overthrew him. Cyrus did not just win a war. He inherited the entire frontier, and the man on the other side of it had married into the losing family. Croesus did not wait to see what this Cyrus would become. He sent to Sparta, to Egypt, to Babylon, and got promises from all three. Then he did the sensible thing and set a date for the spring, when everybody could march together. 3 great powers swore to help him. Not one of them reached Lydia. The war was decided inside the gap between the promise and the arrival, and Croesus was the only person on the board who did not know the campaign had already started. He crossed the Halys in the campaigning season and took Pteria, a fortress town in Cappadocia, and enslaved the people around it. This was not a raid. It was an announcement that the old border no longer applied, delivered by the man who had most to lose if it turned out to be wrong. Cyrus came up to meet him, raising troops from the country he passed through as he went. The two armies found each other on the ground outside Pteria, and there was nothing clever about what happened next. They fought all day. Herodotus says the losses were heavy on both sides, and that when the dark came neither army had broken. That is the honest description of most ancient battles, and it is the one we least like to hear. 2 forces spent, nothing decided, everyone still there in the morning. Croesus counted heads and did the arithmetic. He had fewer men than Cyrus, and the allies he had paid for were months away. So he made a decision that was completely reasonable and completely fatal. He went home. He recrossed the river, rode back to Sardis, and sent his hired troops away for the winter with orders to reassemble in the spring. Nobody campaigned in winter. Every king he had ever fought had agreed on that point. Herodotus puts it plainly. It never entered his thought that Cyrus might march against Sardis. Not that he judged it unlikely, that the possibility did not occur to him at all. The moment Cyrus learned the Lydian army had dispersed, he marched. He crossed the river, came down the road Croesus had just traveled, and moved so fast that he arrived outside Sardis as his own first messenger. The king found out there was a war on by looking at it. Croesus was not helpless. He still had the one arm every rider in the ancient world agreed was the best of its kind, the Lydian cavalry, riding big horses and fighting with a long spear. He led them out onto the plain in front of the city, and by every reasonable measure, he should have won. The ground could not have suited him better. Wide, flat, watered by the Hermus and its tributaries, with nothing on it to break a charge. Cyrus looked at that plain and at the horsemen forming up on it, and by Herodotus's account, he was frightened. A Median officer named Harpagus gave him the answer. The Persian army had camels with it, hundreds of them, carrying the food and the baggage. Harpagus told him to take the loads off, put soldiers on their backs, and send them out in front. That officer had a history with this family. Astyages had once ordered Harpagus to kill the infant Cyrus, and Harpagus gave the child to a herdsman instead. When the king found out, he invited Harpagus to dinner, served him his own son, and then showed him the head. Harpagus went home, said nothing for years, and when Cyrus came of age, it was Harpagus who handed him the Median army. The horse fears the camel and cannot endure either the sight or the smell of him. That is the entire tactic. Not a maneuver, not a formation, a fact about animals, applied at the right moment by a man who had nothing else. It worked exactly as described. The horses caught the smell, turned, and carried their riders off the field whether the riders wanted to go or not. And then the Lydians did something that deserves to be remembered better than it is. They got down off the horses and went at the Persians on foot. Herodotus is not a Lydian partisan, and he says it anyway. They were no cowards. They fought on the ground they had meant to fight on horseback, and they lost, and a great many men on both sides did not walk off that plain. The survivors were driven back inside the walls, and their Croesus should have been safe. The citadel of Sardis sits on a spur of crumbling rock above the city, and on one side it is not so much fortified as simply impossible. No one walls a cliff. Generations earlier, a Lydian king named Meles had been told that if the lion were carried round the wall, Sardis could never be taken. He carried it round the wall. He skipped one stretch, because that stretch was sheer, and no one would ever come up it. The siege went nowhere for a fortnight. Then a soldier on the wall dropped his helmet, and it rolled away down the unguarded side, and he climbed after it and climbed back up. A Mardian in the Persian camp named Hieroedes happened to be watching. The next day he went up the same way, and other men came up behind him. What happened after that is not something we have to take on a Greek writer's word. It is in the ground. The Harvard and Cornell expedition has been digging at Sardis for decades, and they have found the day the city fell, sealed under its own collapsed walls the way Pompeii was sealed under ash. 136 arrowheads packed inside a single gate. Houses burned so hot the mud brick ran and set like glass. 2 young men, dumped with the rubble instead of buried, both with the fracture you get in the forearm when you raise it over your head. 2 sword cuts and an axe wound in one of the skulls. As for Croesus himself, we have 3 endings and no way to choose between them. Herodotus has Cyrus build a pyre and set him on it, and a rainstorm put it out, and the richest man in the world spends his old age as an advisor to the king who destroyed him. But the poet Bacchylides, writing earlier than Herodotus and probably read by him, says Croesus lit the fire himself rather than be taken, and that Apollo carried him off to the Hyperboreans at the edge of the world. And the cuneiform record, where it can be read at all, may simply say the king was killed. There is a second thing worth being honest about. You will see this battle called Thymbra, fought by 420,000 Lydians against 196,000 Persians. Those numbers, and that name, come from Xenophon, from the Cyropaedia, which is a novel about the ideal ruler written a century and a half later. Herodotus, who is nearer, gives the battle no name and no numbers at all. And then there is the date. Everything you have just watched is filed under 547 BC, and that year comes from one line on one Babylonian tablet, which records that Cyrus crossed the Tigris and marched against a country, and then breaks. The name of the country is destroyed. Scholars have called it one of the most notorious gaps in the whole corpus. Some read the surviving traces as Urartu, not Lydia, which would put Cyrus a very long way from Sardis that year and leave the fall of the city loose somewhere in the next date. So the most quoted date in the career of Cyrus the Great is a hole in a clay tablet. What is not in doubt is the ash layer, the arrowheads at the gate, the two men with their broken arms, and the third of a gram of silver, stamped with a lion and a bull, lying where it fell beside one of them. Lydia was the first great kingdom to go. 8 years later, Cyrus stood outside the largest city on earth. And what happened? There is a fight between two sets of sources. One that says Babylon fell without a battle, and one that says he drained a river and walked in underneath the walls. Subscribe, and we take that one next.